Hello and welcome to a new Flight Simulator 2024 video. Today's video is going to be a tutorial of some sorts for the use of the Garmin G1000. If you have played Flight Simulator before and you've been struggling to use this, hopefully this video will give you a little bit of an idea of how to set up a flight plan. So what I've done is I've played around with the flight computer a little bit and never really fully come to grips with it, really, let's be honest. So I've played around with it a little bit to try and make a flight plan. I've got it working properly, so this is how I got it done. So basically you want to click on the flight plan button and you can then choose your departure, your start or your approach. Now one of the things you can also do is change it from the procedures menu as well, which will allow you to go in to the flight plan. Now you can see here I'm having a little bit of trouble selecting something. I've typed in the code, hasn't quite liked it. When I've typed in approach here though, we've got a different looking box, so we can see that it's given us a bit more information, and at the bottom you can see activate. This top line here you can select by using the inner scroll wheel to select which part of this you're filling out, and then the outer wheel to change the numbers or letters that are being entered. You need to enter the code for either the airport or the waypoint that you're going to be using. So in this case we chose Flying Aces. Now I just chucked myself in a random place in America, had no idea where I really was, and then that's when I've set up my flight plan from there, just making it up as I went along. So I thought we'll get a fairly close airport so it's not too far away and it's not too much of a long time setting it up. It was pretty easy once I've got used to it. Now, few of these things that to call out: the approach, you need to obviously think about where your approach is coming from direction wise, and also you want to think about wind direction, as I had an ill-fated Chile adventure, I guess, and that was pretty impossible to land. So once we've selected that there, we press the enter key and it's taken us onto the flight plan page. So we've selected our destination, which is a straight in approach or runway 20 or 12, whatever it was, and we're now going to go and do the same thing by using the inner scroll wheel to go to the origin, and then using the outer scroll wheel to select our departure. So we can see that our departure point is P0R, which is, I'm not even sure what the name of the place is, to be honest, but we can see that that's now been entered into the flight plan, and we now want to get an en route point. So if we want to maybe vector ourselves a little bit out to the side before we make our approach in, we can choose a waypoint somewhere along the way to expand that flight plan out to one of the sides, basically, just to make the approach that little bit easier, so that there's more of a gradual turn than a bit more of a sharp 90-degree type turn. You can't really see the EFB here, but I've moved around a little bit and I've selected something that's close by on that route. You don't necessarily need to do this, you can just have a direct to route. You can even just press the direct to button and basically do the same thing. But we've put in P09 as the origin. The en route point is Papa Alpha 41, which I believe is a hospital in this area, and then the 0 Papa November 2 visual for runway 30, and that's going to take us basically straight in to that runway, and it's going to be lining us up right with the runway heading, which will make the flight a lot easier. Another thing I've done just to make my life easier is I've set my cruising altitude at 4000. I've changed the heading to the runway heading for takeoff, which just coincidentally happens to be a direct straight line to the en route waypoint where the hospital is. So as we take off, we're basically flying straight for a little while. So once we get in the air, we'll put the autopilot on, we'll have the nav button pressed, which you can see above the course knob. Once we've done that, the plane will then align with that, provided we're close enough to the track that we've made here on the flight plan. Okay, so nothing else to do really at this point other than to get ourselves in the air. Once we're in the air, we can then let the aircraft take over and fly the rest of the route. Okay, we're just getting set off for takeoff now. Now at this point I did forget that I already had my flaps down, and instead of looking for where it was, I just put them up and back down again. It's pretty lazy, but the results are the same. Okay, so we're spooling the engines up a little bit. Didn't really need to do it, turns out. The aircraft takes off very quickly. Side note, the aircraft is the Cessna Grand Caravan. If you've played career mode, you're probably quite familiar with it, provided you've unlocked the specialisations. Was a little bit of wind on the takeoff, blew us off to the right a slight bit, but nothing too drastic. And once we're in the air, you can see here on the heads-up display in front of us that you can see some boxes basically appearing. So that's similar to what you'll see in career mode when you've got like a destination selected. Now, it basically does exactly the same thing, but it's just like a marker or a visual aid if you are flying manually and you want to keep your altitude for any specific reason, or your heading rather than following the actual compass headings on the aircraft. So we're in the air, we are stable, autopilot's on now at this point. Well, I say stable, relatively stable. FLC button's been pressed. We are going to get to our destination altitude of 4,000. Might change that. And we're changing the rate of ascent here with the vertical mode reference switch once we've enabled FLC mode. That basically just means that you can increase your rate of ascent or decrease your rate of ascent or descent, depending on whether you're climbing or descending, via the same switch. And we're adjusting the heading now to align with our navigation point. Not quite sure what to actually call that. GPS track? Something like that. I'm not a pilot, so I don't really know a lot of these terminologies. However, I managed to figure it out myself, so it was pretty easy, turns out. Just need to play around with it a little. And I think the more you use this, or the more you get used to, rather than having the game select your departure point and your arrival point and putting all of your route within that, the more you'll probably be more comfortable with using this. And like I said, it is pretty straightforward. And here we go. The aircraft is now flying itself. We're on the track that we set up through the aircraft and not externally, or not before. There was no flight plan loaded previously, so we've basically just created this. Now the next thing we're going to see here is when you're in the air and when you're cruising along, provided you have set up your waypoints etc. correctly, you will see that the aircraft will follow this. So it will turn, and it will turn left or right. Basically, it will just follow that track along the map, and we can see that we're coming up to a nice left-hand turn here. The aircraft's going to do it all by itself, provided we've set the aircraft up correctly to maintain level flight with our power settings etc. We'll have no problems. Other than some turbulence, however, it's not a huge problem, is it really? It's perfectly flyable. Okay, that's us, we're in the turn now. The aircraft is just aligning with the next point. Because we've got a straight in approach, it looks like the flight computer has programmed in a final, like a straight final approach, which makes sense. So you can see that when on the map here on the right hand side, there's another straight line with another left hand turn coming up, which we'll see shortly as well, and is going to take us on to our final approach heading. The good thing about this as well is that I had no idea what the airport looked like, how long or short the runway may or may not have been, and I'll be honest that this kind of scared me a little bit as soon as I saw it. You'll see that shortly when we get closer to the airport, how difficult the landing may be in a different aircraft. Now thankfully the Cessna Grand Caravan does have reverse thrust and is pretty good at short landings and short takeoffs, which was, turns out, the best choice I made. Now I did try and fly this and record this video in Chile previously. I'll get to that in a second, but just here again, we're still following the heading or the route that's been planned in. The aircraft is now turning itself, don't have to do anything else. Pretty easy, pretty straightforward, no issues, easy flying. But I did try and record this in Chile, and it was extremely windy. When I programmed in my runway to land at, I never really considered how much of a headwind there may have been, sorry, a tailwind there was. And yeah, it was impossible to land, and I'm pretty sure I crashed a few times. So maybe take that into consideration and check the weather where you're going to be landing and what the wind direction is. Because you're planning this in yourself, you're not having the game tell you which runway is best to land at. The ATC might not really help you out there. So you might end up landing with a very, very difficult tailwind. Now at this point, can you spot the airport? If you are seasoned in flight sim or are a pilot, maybe you have, but at this point in time I had no idea where in this green and brown mess in front of me the airport was, and I was looking at the map on the right hand side, noticing that we're getting a lot closer, and as you can see there when we zoom in, right ahead of us, that tiny little dirt strip is Flying Aces. Now, I'm not sure which aircraft take off from here. Presumably maybe some tail draggers that are probably a lot better at short takeoffs than the Grand Caravan. But, like I said, the Grand Caravan worked out okay here, surprisingly. I think when I noticed that, I realised that it was time for the autopilot to come off and to do it myself. So that's basically what we're doing now. As you can see, there is a little bit of a rocking motion on the aircraft right now. There is a little bit of wind. It's not a whole lot. I've flown in a lot worse in this game. But it was enough to make the approach a little bit more challenging. And I think you can see that the airport altitude is fairly high. It's not quite at sea level. You're probably talking at about, I don't know, at this point, what are we, 1,900? So maybe like 1.5, 1.4 maybe? Hard to say. You can look these things up prior to doing these types of landings and flights, but I like to just, eyeball it and hope for the best, which usually ends up in disaster, let's be honest. Okay, I should have probably switched to the upper position here so I could get a better view of the airport, because if you notice, there is a bit of a building just before the runway threshold, which is pretty dangerous, and well, it was hard to see. If I was in the upper position, I probably would have had a better view of that, which would have made it a bit easier on the landing, would have probably been a bit more stable, and I would have probably been able to land a little bit quicker and be more confident. Now, the landing here, obviously we're still rocking backwards and forwards quite a bit here, pitching up and down, and the landing has become quite long at this point. I think here, at this point, when I was recording this, I was almost certain that this was going to end in disaster, but it was actually quite a smooth touchdown. Very, very quick stop. Aircraft, like I said, has reverse thrust. The brakes seem to be pretty good, so it didn't take a long time to slow down to a complete stop. And then at this point, all we need to do is taxi ourselves back up the runway, park up, and then that's that. So, I hope that you have found this to be helpful, and if you've never used the G1000 or tried to create a flight plan with it and use it for flying your aircraft, that it's been of some benefit for you. I'm sure if you do want to, you can slow down the video, you can pause at certain sections if you find that that's easier, just to repeat a section and follow along with what we've been doing to create one. I know a lot of people do struggle with getting to grips with how these things work, and there's not really a whole lot of documentation in the sim. Now, there's probably lots of videos and tutorials and, these spreadsheets and, technical, diagrams, etc. on the internet, but, I thought it was at this point where it's a good time to release something, and I haven't made a video for a little while, so it was a nice fun one and a nice change of pace for me as well. So I hope it's been beneficial, I hope you've enjoyed the video, and I hope that in general you're enjoying the videos that have been coming out recently. If you do think it's worth your time, remember to leave a like and subscribe. and hopefully you'll be tuning in for more videos in the future. Anyway, that's it from me. I'll let the aircraft taxi its way till the end, and that'll be us. But thank you very much for watching. Hope you have a great day. Take care. See you next time.